Welcome back to Education Matters. Did you correctly answer B? Fighting and or aggression is the top reason for elementary school suspensions in Wake County, followed by class or activity disturbance. We're going to continue our discussion about racial disparities in school discipline. Keith, I want to go back to you. Teacher diversity, and then the idea of, we've been talking about that on this show some, that the fact that most of our teaching workforce are white females, while we're now a majority minority student population. Is, I don't know, misunderstanding, lack of cultural awareness, are those things contributing to it? Are those things that we should look at the current teaching workforce and then working toward having a more reflective, representative workforce?
Well, obviously there are, cultural differences that exist. And so certainly cultural awareness training and those things would help when you look at the question that you just raised in terms of the reasons for those suspensions, fighting aggression being at the top of the list. Students often come to school angry, hungry, and not in the best position to be able to learn because of, again, some of the stressors, adverse childhood experiences that we talked about earlier that they deal with at home on a daily basis. And so, again, ensuring that we have a teaching force that does resemble what our classrooms and schools are looking like, that look like, and that are able to understand and be able to relate to the experiences, trauma, stresses that again, students are dealing with at home and that they then bring to school.
And if they don't look like, at least like I said, the understanding, and you keep you keep going back to the trauma question, because that's what I hear from teachers myself, is that the kids are angry. They're coming to school, they're in situations that's a normal reaction, right?
Well, part of it is that if I have witnessed community violence, you would expect me to respond in some type of way. So if I've witnessed community violence and then I come to school and I'm ready, to learn about Christopher Columbus, for example, I might be a little bit frustrated and angry on multiple levels. The other aspect is oftentimes teachers don't know specifically what trauma children are going through or are not able to make those distinctions. So for instance, community violence would be different than, say, a child in the foster care system. And if you're in the foster care system, you have dealt with some level of trauma. And oftentimes there is not a good communication between the principal, school counselor, and the teachers to know, hey, this student just lost a parent. This student just witnessed something that was horrible. And so sometimes teachers don't understand why a student is fidgety or why they may seem angry. All those things come into place, and instead it's a very behavior-based and immediate behavior-based disciplinary process.
Exclusion, move it out. We want the child out of the classroom because they're disrupting other students.
Absolutely.
That does, and that's, Keith, go ahead.
Well, and when you look at, all that teachers have on their plate in terms of teaching the curriculum, sticking with the standards, there's a lot of pressure on our teachers. And so it's how can we best support them, provide them the necessary supports in the classroom to help address that. While too, they obviously they have to, take the personal responsibility to, as Dr. Bentley said, to, understand and recognizing why a child might be fidgety, why a child might not be paying attention today, or seems to be drifting, or or something of that nature. So again, there's not one specific.
Well, let me ask you about, how about the school culture and climate? One of the things when the Public School Forum did some study work on race equity, restorative justice practices was something, and we can talk about what that, but basically sort of the opposite of your sort of zero tolerance, command and control. To be honest with you, this conversation around school safety concerns me because it feels like we're talking about making it even more sort of armed. But there are definitely folks who will tell me these kids just need to be, they just need to be tightened up, right? We just got to get them in line and zero tolerance and everything be better. But your research shows that actually has the opposite effect.
It has the absolute opposite effects. It's one of those things that makes adults feel better, but it actually doesn't really have positive effects on children, on their learning and their overall outcomes. So when you decide we need to make an example out of a child, so that they can know what it's like in the real world. If I'm poor and I'm Black, trust me, I know that the world is not fair. So I don't need you and your disciplinary practices that don't think about my context, that don't have any compassion to let me know that the world is not fair or that there's consequences for my actions. So this restorative justice approach is exactly the right direction to go in.
And it's about building relationships, because that's one of the things we understand. Children that are in these situations, they're lacking those relationships, which again, when I think about suspensions, they may be acting out because of a bad situation at home, so what are we going to do? We're going to suspend them and send them back home. Is that something, what's Wayne County thinking about as a school board? You're a school board member, policy-wise, other things. What are you thinking about?
We talked a lot about relationships in our meeting last night and understanding the importance of that, particularly when it comes to equity issues, such as this. We had a lot of discussion about a moratorium. Do we put a moratorium on elementary suspensions or K-2 suspensions until we can at least get an understanding or get a grip on what is happening, why is it happening, and what our responses to that might be. We did not make that decision to put a moratorium just yet. That may be one of a number of solutions our staff will bring back to us to consider. But we're going to take 30 days and have our staff look at how we develop a response, both a short-term, immediate response, because we do believe that this is a crisis, and then more long-term impacts from a policy standpoint. But we know that something needs to change, something needs to happen and happen quickly. Again, if that's putting a stop on all suspensions at this point, if it's restorative justice practices, if we're creating alternative learning spaces within the school so that we're not sending kids home, adding more counselors, adding more social workers in the school. All those are things that we are considering in terms of...
And they all cost money. And they all take resources.
Unfortunately, some of them do cost money.
What are your thoughts on sort of next steps? Where do we go for solutions?
Well, actually, before I talk about solutions,
okay.
I did want to quickly just make sure to point out that Black girls are also disproportionately disciplined. So we think about males because overall males are higher, but Black girls in North Carolina statewide have long-term suspensions that are 5 times higher than their white counterparts. So the disparity is actually larger, even though it's a smaller number. And so talking about thinking about practices that we can put in place for adults to understand that oftentimes when children talk back, it's because they're trying to self-advocate, but they're doing it inappropriately and childlike because they're children. All right.
Well, we only have a moment left. Any last comment on that, Keith?
Well, I think that, too, it's important for us to understand what is the impact of suspending kids, particularly at such a younger age. It sort of starts a trajectory where their label is being targets for discipline. They're not in school, they're losing instructional days, and we know what the long-term effects are in terms of their ability to earn income at a later age and attending college rates and being successful.
Well, I'm glad we're focusing on it, and I'm really glad you guys came on and talked to us about it today. We'll continue this conversation on another show. So thanks so much. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
After the break, this week's Leadership Spotlight.